Inuyasha.
Inuyasha is an anime and manga franchise that centers around the titular silver-haired half-demon and Kagome Higurashi, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who just happens to be a reincarnation of his 50 years dead ex-girl Kikyo. In fact, Kikyo is the type of dead girl that walks around, and mostly just doesn't allow Inuyasha to get over her. But you probably already know this much, considering you clicked on this video. You also probably read the title, unless I'm just that good at making clickbait thumbnails. Inuyasha, created by manga artist Rumiko Takahashi, has been massively successful. For starters, Inuyasha ran on the Cartoon Network's Adult Swim TV block from 2002 to 2014. And the original run only lasted till 2006, so we're talking about 8 years of reruns. I mean, in terms of Western reception, that already puts it up there with Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball Z, both of which, by the way, are considered shonen, meaning that they're marketed towards boys and young men. And Inuyasha is also technically a shonen, which is something interesting we'll get into later. But yeah, Rumiko's manga, Inuyasha, has sold over 50 million copies to date. That puts it above the sales of Yu Yu Hakusho's manga, which had its run a little while before Inuyasha. Honestly, it's hard to find good hard statistics on just how successful Inuyasha was, and still is, considering there's a new show out. But all signs point to vary. For instance, Rumiko Takahashi paid the highest in taxes of any manga artist for multiple years during Inuyasha's run, paying the yen equivalent of $1.3 million in 2004. Inuyasha has sold over 2 million English home videos and continues to be offered on paid streaming services. Inuyasha has been particularly popular in the Spanish-speaking world, where the new series Yashahime has beaten both One Piece and My Hero Academia in ratings. And one sign of just how much influence Inuyasha had was that BOA, the queen of K-pop, made the fourth ending scene for the anime, called Every Heart. And she did both a Japanese and English version. I mean, most popular animes do tend to have good music, but the fact that they were able to get someone so influential to collaborate with this anime project speaks volumes. And how about this? Do you remember Boxy? Probably not. And you probably don't need to be going down that rabbit hole, but the point is, she was one of the earlier internet personalities. While her personal, signed, Inuyasha messenger bag with a picture of her in it was spotted on an eBay bidding war, and at the time, it was up to 1 cent shy of $1 million. The auction did end up being voluntarily removed by Boxy, but it's another interesting example of a convergence of influence. But anyways, Inuyasha, and also Ranma 1/2, are the mangas that truly brought Rumiko Takahashi to the high standing in the manga industry she enjoys today. But before they could do that, she had to draw them. And before she could do that, she had to develop her style. Which brings us to the question, what is a Rumiko Takahashi manga? Rumiko's first major influence as a manga artist was boys' mangas bought by her older brother, as well as novels by the science fiction author Yasutaka Tsutsui. Basically, she developed an interest in shonen as a girl, and when she decided to start creating it herself, she definitely added her own flavor to it, and often with an element of science fiction or magic. Her first major hit in Japan, Urusei Yatsura, can be roughly translated to mean those obnoxious aliens. Rumiko's specialty is romance themes, and in particular the love triangle and romantic tension, and more in a lighthearted comical way than to get too much of a soap opera going. I mean, she doesn't shy away from serious themes, but her work tends to be a bit fantastical and even slapstick. In Inuyasha, the primary setting is a version of feudal Japan, but with yokai, which is the Japanese term for basically anything supernatural. And if you look at the setting objectively, it's quite brutal. Japan is in a state of unrest, with constant warfare going on, and demons are wiping out entire villages on the regular. I mean, if you're a dot-eyed villager in this series, it's like you're a piece of driftwood in a burning sea. But because the setting is so different from our day-to-day experience, it doesn't register as strongly as it might otherwise. After all, this story really centers around love triangles and romantic tension. For example, and by the way, spoiler alert from here forward, the main bad guy of this series had the same love interest as Inuyasha. No, not Kagome, the better one. And his attempts to obtain her play a major part in setting the story in motion. And just to be sure we're on the same page about this, a love triangle involves 3 people, each of which having romantic interest in at least one of the others. This virtually guarantees lots of friction, difficult and comical scenarios, and maybe even disaster. And Rumiko is a master with those triangles, which exist in all of her long-running series. And I mean as driving plot devices, Illuminati confirmed. Now romantic tension is that will they won't they stuff, where you know these two characters have feelings for each other, but for whatever reason they just can't seem to move things forward. And that nail-biting tension keeps viewers coming back, because they need to see a resolution. Even though it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. I mean, Kagome is the main character, and Inuyasha is the title of the show. But it's really not about the final resolution, it's about the journey. And I'm not just saying that to defend some weakness in the show. You see, what Rumiko does is carefully set up a scenario and then play with it, and everything else is an afterthought. She's been accused of dragging series on for too long, but I can imagine in her view there's just more milk in that cow. And speaking of setting up scenarios, another of Rumiko's strengths is her originality. In her stories, the female is often the lead protagonist, while the male love interest is often the tsundere. That means like a cold, standoffish person, who might even be violent, that slowly warms up and opens up to the people around them. Except that role is usually taken up by a female or a child. And that's because this trait is usually combined with moe, meaning characters that are rather weak and helpless, and elicit that I must protect feeling. But Rumiko though, she mostly just uses it to fuel that romantic tension, as Inuyasha at least tries to do the protecting. One trick that Rumiko likes to mix things up is gender role reversals. Like when Kagome did the Sleeping Beauty thing and woke Inuyasha up from 50 years of slumber, and instead of a poisoned apple, he was left in that state by a poisoned ex-girlfriend. Shot through the heart. And who's to blame, darling? You give love some bad ideas. Another thing about Rumiko is how she likes to poke fun at her male fans. Basically about how we, can be very visual and very single-minded. And if you don't catch my drift, you better hold on to your continence. Let's take Ataru from Urusei Yatsura for example. The guy chases skirts like he's making a quilt, you know, regardless of the fact that he's basically engaged. Interestingly, she has said that she only has female assistants because in her words, that way they don't have to worry about certain things so much. And while she does poke fun at her male fans like this, she admits she does go out of her way to make her female characters appealing. She generally tries to create something that appeals to both the male and female perspective, and you see that in Inuyasha. I mean, it's not the most amazing fan service battle manga, if you don't mind my shonen stereotypes. But a big part of creating a good fight is giving it plot significance, and she did a good job of that for most of the series. In fact, the plot is so important that the actual battle system seems to bend to its will. But I digress. Rumiko's strengths are in romance themes, and the way she has utilized those strengths have made her quite wealthy, particularly with Ranma 1/2 and her best known work in the West, Inuyasha.
She's with another man. Too bad. I hate having to resort to violence.
So Inuyasha has many romantic tropes built into this fantasy setting. And if we want to understand what makes this series so popular, a good place to start is to understand the tropes being used. And honestly, you're going to find a lot of these to be cliché, because they are, but rarely will you find so many in one place. So forbidden love is one that comes up often in this series, with Inuyasha himself being the product of a taboo union between a demon and a human, with its full demon half-brother Sesshomaru having lots to say about it. And then there's Inugome, Sessrin, and Shippo tries every second filler episode. There's other half-demon half-humans known as Hanyo in the series as well. Their appearance and traits can differ wildly, but more importantly, they generally face ostracization. You see, humans of course have some hang-ups about demons for all their monster of the week type behavior, whereas demons generally don't fraternize with humans because they see them as weaklings of the week, every week. Not to mention, demons live on a different kind of time frame because they're generally much longer lived than humans. I mean, even the half-breed Inuyasha looks like this being 200 years old. I mean, let's be honest, Kagome can live a full, healthy, happy life with him and die at a ripe old age before he even starts shaving. And it's like, then what? He just hangs out at Whack-Donald's till he finds another teenager? And if he doesn't want to go through all that again at that point, might I suggest trying to date Sesshomaru's mom? She seems like a blast and a half. And I'm talking about the attempt. I don't really think he'll succeed. But who knows? Maybe by then, he'll resemble his dad enough to confuse her feelings. I mean, Kagome got her foot in the door with him, with her resemblance to Kikyo. Fun fact, Chakin is also a half-demon. He's not half anything else though, he's just not good enough. Anyways, forbidden romance has some good aspects to it. Not being accepted by the wider society will push these two lovers into being more intimate with each other. And not to mention, it feels authentic, because they're knowingly paying a price to be with each other. And societal forces would not normally pair these two off. And as you know, because so far, I've told you, Rumiko is a love triangle master, and these forbidden romances have a lot of potential for interesting love triangles. A great example of this would be Inuyasha's parents. You see, Inuyasha's dad was the great demon of the West, Toga, while his mom, Izuyoi, was a human princess. But there was also this samurai, who also fell for Izuyoi, and he was a real sore loser that she didn't choose him, burning down heavily pregnant Izuyoi's mansion with her in it, with the intentions of drawing Toga into a fight, and preventing the birth of the half-demon Inuyasha, because it's a child that shouldn't be. And he had picked an opportune time to do so because Toga was already heavily injured from a fight with Ryokotse here, and this leads to the death of both men. Izuyoi also dies for a while, but narrowly escapes anyways because Toga was a pretty reliable guy. Another big trope we see in Inuyasha is enemies to lovers. Particularly, we see this in the early relationship between Inuyasha and Kikyo. No discord, no concord is an Eastern proverb. In other words, friends are often made after a fight. Out of blows, friendship grows. Basically, after fighting, you can really get to know what the other person is really about. In a way, fighting is the ultimate show of vulnerability, staking not just your ego or your feelings, but your entire future on the outcome. That takes honesty. And that honesty is like bedrock that a romance can be built upon. It also guarantees that there will be a lot of emotional investment. And last but not least, great makeup cuddles. Pair the spares. This trope is a neat little trick for when you have a couple third wheels kicking around, romantically speaking. On the face of it, Moroku and Sango don't seem very compatible. The pervert priest whose ability to commit is pretty sus, and the best girl ninja who knows how to put in an honest day's work. Both are quite family oriented in a manner of speaking. I mean, Moroku has a habit of very quickly asking women to bear his children, and I guess it could be argued that he's just desperate to continue his family line because of his short life expectancy. You see, he has a curse, basically a black hole in the palm of his hand that he just barely keeps under control with his priest magic. But you know, this is just Rumiko doing her thing, poking fun at this trait of men. You see, men have two strategies, as it were, the low investment and the high investment strategy. And women do as well, but obviously their necessary minimum investment when it comes to the process of reproduction is a lot greater than that of men. Moroku does have genuine feelings for Sango. In other words, he's invested in her, but he's not ready to give up one strategy for the other. And by the way, the reason I know that Sango is very family oriented is because of her whole situation with her brother. It's messed up. Now here's a trope that adds a little spice to the relationship of Inuyasha and Kagome. The fact that both are just bad at expressing their true emotions. It leads to a lot of comedic situations for sure, but also, especially early on, it causes frustrations and misunderstandings, where Kagome will storm off back home with but after some time apart, they get pulled back towards each other by their feelings. You know the saying, time apart makes the heart grow fonder, so you get the payoff when they reunite. Another type of payoff is when the pressure's on, and they have a habit of losing composure and screaming each other's names. Accidental pervert. As is typical for Rumiko, this one's played a little different from usual. Because you see, Inuyasha is not a pervert. In fact, he seems almost completely indifferent when he stumbles upon Kagome bathing. You see, this trope can be romantic in the sense that the girl gets to play coy and blush a little bit. But in this case, not only does Inuyasha show no interest, but he makes it a point to say that Kikyo was better looking. So Kagome takes a big L here. She reveals that deep down she wants him to be interested by looking so down about it. How about the damsel in this dress trope? This one is played a little different from usual as well, because often she has to show her own strong will, taking measures to survive for quite some time before the cavalry arrives. It doesn't hurt, of course, that she's also a Shikon jewel finding device, so she's got that card to play. Nonetheless, when she gets into trouble, it can still produce those he really does care moments. In terms of fights, it does make sense for her to be targeted to be a hostage or just incapacitated, because she's a total glass cannon with her purifying arrows, and taking your eyes off her could be the last thing you do as a demon. Battles in Inuyasha do tend to make about as much use of human leverage. In other words, things like taking hostages and rendering members of the opposing team in a life-threatening state, as they do the actual clashing of techniques. And how about this for a trope? Timmy fell down the well. What's that, Inuyasha? Kagome went down the well, and you don't give a crap? Sure sounds like it. Don't you worry, she'll be back. Now why don't you go join my viewers in the sulking corner while I work on part 2. Now, thus far, I've laid the foundation for what I really want to talk about. Part 2 is where we can get into the really juicy stuff. So don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, and rewatch the entire series.